Hey there and welcome back. So now that we've completed the modeling portion of the fruit, our next task is to take all of the fruit and combine them into a single scene for the image on the front of the package. So if we look back at the reference of this image here, we can see we need to take all of the fruit, combine them into a single scene to create this arrangement that we're going to be using for the front of our package for rendering that out. So if we jump back into Modo and we open up one of our first scenes, so I'm going to open up the orange 2 that we've created. This was our final orange. The first thing I want to do is in my items list is I'm going to take all of the various layers that make them up and I'm going to merge those together. So we're going to merge the meshes. Just keep that at their default is fine. And then one of the things that's going to make life a little bit easier down the road here is I'm going to go in, and I wasn't very good about setting this up earlier on, but what I like to do once I start merging scenes together is I want to give every layer a unique name. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to start renaming all of these layers. And we can actually delete these layers because they're no longer needed. And that one is unique. All right, with all of our naming all cleaned up, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to save this as a separate file. I'm going to call this Orange 02B. And then it's always a good idea to open up Preview just to take a look at our scene file. Make sure that none of the changes that we've made in here are going to affect the look of our object. So since we're happy with the look of our orange here, let's jump through and we're going to change the names in the lemon and the cherries and the strawberry, and then we'll open up all of those scene files to go on to the next step. So you can just go in and you can do that yourself, and we'll be back here in just a second. So I've done all my renaming and I have my strawberry, my cherry, my lemon, and my orange, the final versions of each one of those files opened. And I've also created a new untitled scene that I'm going to be copying everything over. So the way I do that is just simply in the items list via drag and drop. So just click on the object you want and then drag it into your new scene. Accept the default, that'll bring in your shaders. We can just delete this. Now all of the textures in here are going to be the ones for the orange, so I'm just going to select all those, hit Control G and group that locator and call these orange. And then I'm going to go into the shader tree, and this imported shaders, I'm just going to call it orange all. Now I'm going to go into my lemon file and do the exact same thing here. Same thing here. Group those. Call it lemon. Now the lemon items ended up in here because this still thinks it's the imported shaders folder. So just because I renamed that, it's still going to pull all new shaders into that same folder. So I'm just going to pull those out, hit Control G to group those. Call that lemon all. Now I'm going to go through and do this for the next two fruits, exact same thing. Okay, that gives us a nice clean items list and a nice clean shader tree, so I'm going to turn off all of those texture locators here. And I'm going to save this scene very quick. So I'll put this in video 10. I'm going to call this All Fruits 01. So now what we want to do is we want to look back at our packaging comp here, and we just want to put the fruit into this sort of an arrangement. So I'm going to copy this here, or move this onto my second monitor, but you'll definitely want to be referring back to that image. as you position all of the fruits. So I think to start here, I'm going to add first, I'm going to hit in and move that down here. Call this the ground plane. And then we're just going to create a big polygon here. So this is just going to be position at 0, 0. Same as we've done before. About 10 meters in size. And then I just have segments of 10 on there. That's just a flat plane. So we'll just leave that there temporarily. So that can allow us to align everything just to the ground plane. So we'll be doing some scaling here. So from the front view, we want to move this orange. Move our lemon. Rotate it a little bit so it matches that. We definitely want to scale that down some. Not too much on the lemon. Strawberry is going to go in here. It's going to get rotated this way a little bit. I'm going to turn off select through. Because personally it drives me a little bit nuts every time I try and click on something and it automatically selects another object. Now the only one that's really sort of the wrong scale, I think, is the cherries. So, and I think also when we modeled it, we have it a little bit backwards. So if we look back at our reference, this bump here is kind of on the outside edge and these curve this direction. So I think we're going to do a quick little mirror on these, and that will get that better orientation for us on those cherries. So with the cherries selected, I'm just going to go to 3 to go into component mode, and then I'm just going to hit Shift V, and then just click on that. I want to do that down the Z. Drop that with the Q, and then drag and select middle mouse button to select all those polygons and delete. And then we're just going to go into items mode here, and we're going to go to edit and center bounding box to center. So now we can scale these cherries down a little bit. Look at them from the side. From the front, they look like that. Let's rotate a little tiny bit. Action center, local. Just so those are resting flat on the ground. Maybe we will reset the rotation on that. Get those right on the ground. Move those over here. All right, let's get the camera into position here. This is back in the Z. Definitely need to scale down that strawberry. So really, there's no formula here for this. There's no special training to this. This is just a lot of tweaking and moving around and referring back to the reference. So I'm just going to do a speed modeling session here. So I'm just going to keep working, and then I'll speed this up. But there's nothing I need to say that's going to show you how to do this the proper way. It's just going to be a lot of tweaking, and then I'll save my file out. And you can certainly open up my file if you wish to check it out and see what it is that I've actually done here. But I'm just going to go through and continue tweaking this. Okay, so I think that's a pretty pleasing arrangement. I think the last thing we need to fix is we need to rotate this leaf down here onto the opposite direction. So we'll do that really quick. Just go into polygons mode by pressing 3 there. And then I'm just going to rotate that leaf around. See how that looks? A little too much. Yeah, I just want to get that. So this isn't botanically accurate for a cherry leaf to do this, but for illustrative purposes, I think for the front of this package, we can get away with it. So once again, look at camera. So I think that is a pretty pleasing layout of our fruits for our purposes here. So let's go back in and save that file. And I'm going to open up a quick preview here. All right, so that is our fruit. But it looks different than it did in our other scenes. And that is because the lighting is different and because we have a different environment. So we're going to go in here to the environment. And I'm going to add in my favorite environment, this Cherry Hill Road. And then I'm going to turn that off as visible to camera. Now I'm going to add in another item. So now we want to create a seamless white backdrop. So I'm going to go into the item list here and we're going to create a new environment. What that does is this creates a secondary environment item here. And if we select this environment and we turn off everything except for visible to camera, then we can select this material, go constant there, and boost that up to white. And that'll get us our seamless white background. So I'd always said that we would probably be tweaking some of the materials once we got it in here, but it doesn't look like that's really necessary in order to do any tweaking here, because looks pretty good. I think for our purposes here that this looks good enough. So you can feel free to go in and make some additional tweaks for this if you want to make this more realistic. Maybe the berry is a little bit big still. I could scale that down some more. Drop that down to the floor. And I think it's okay if it's penetrating here a little bit. That's not visible from the camera point of view. All right, so we're going to do a quickie little render here of our scene. Let's file, save it again. And then we're going to do a render with F9. Okay, so here's our render here, just using the default settings on our scene. So let's look at this at 100%. So we kind of have a harsh shadow that's getting cast here that I think I want to fix. And then we have a lot of speckles going on our cherries themselves. And I think that's just because we don't have enough sample rays on the cherry material. So if we go to cherries all here and the cherry flesh, we can just go into the material item. And we have reflection rays is only 64, so let's boost that up to 512, give that extra rays. And then we're going to go into our light. And I'm just using the default directional light. You can use a big area light if you like. But I'm just using the directional light because I like the specular that it's giving off in this particular case. But I'm going to give this a spread angle of 12. And then we want to also go into our render item, into our settings. And we want to create our direct illumination. I'm going to give that 512 samples as well. So we're going to boost that up a lot. Now let's go back and we're going to do another quick render here, and I'm going to pause it out. So here is our rendered fruit. So for what we're going to be using it for, I think this looks okay. You could go back and we could increase some of the render quality settings to get this a little bit smoother. But for what we're going to be doing this on the front of the package, I think this is going to be just fine. So what I'm going to show you how to do next is we're going to do 2 passes of this rendering so that we can compose this into a transparent cutout in Photoshop. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing an unpremultiplied layer here that has none of this background color in it. And then we're going to do a second shadow only pass using that ground plane that we generated. So the way to do the unpremultiplied pass is we're going to go here and select our final color output, and we just have to go pull this up, and we want to just select this unpremultiply colors option here, and then you want to make sure that you render with your alpha output enabled. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our environment really quick, and holding down the shift key, I'm just going to drag to the left. I'm going to change that constant color to black. And this particular setting only works in rendering. It wouldn't work if you were doing a preview type render on this. So we're going to have to do another render on this and then save out that image. So I'm going to render. And this is going to be our cutout pass of the fruit. So I'm going to pause. Okay, so there is our cutout layer. So we're just going to go here to save image, and I'm going to go into my content here, create a new folder called renders, and we're going to call this one all fruits, call 01. Okay, so now that we've rendered out the fruit cutout, we want to render out just the shadow pass. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to hide the 4 fruits from being rendered, and then we want to take this ground plane and have it just capture the shadow. So the first thing we're going to do is make the ground plane visible. I'm going to switch into polygons mode here, double select that, and I'm going to give this a material, call it ground plane for that. Just accept the defaults on that and click OK. So the first thing we're going to be doing is creating this shadow catcher element for that ground plane. So we're going to do that in the shader tree. So the first thing we need to do in order to do that is add its own shader. So I'm going to go in here to special and add a shader. Now if you notice the base shader, this shader on top of everything, it's not being masked by any element using a material group. So it's just overriding all the settings of anything that's underneath it. So what we need to do to fix that is we just move this mask layer above that base shader, and then any settings we have here will only apply to the objects within this mask, which is going to be the ground plane. So for this, we're going to change our alpha type to shadow catcher, and we're just going to turn off all of these settings here for this stuff. I think that is good enough for what we need to do. We also need to go in, and before we forget, turn our environment back to white. So change that to solid white in your environment item in the environment 2. Now, one last thing we need to do is hide these 5 fruit elements from the render. So we're going to do that by creating a special group mask. So what we do is we select the 4 fruit elements, and we're going to go into the groups. Get a little confusing, so just follow along here. And I'm going to create a new group item. And this one's going to be called all fruits, and it's going to be the type standard, and then from selected item is going to be the mode. And what that does is it automatically adds those 4 fruits into that group. So anything that's contained into this group is going to end up being a masked element for shading. So jump back into the shader tree, and we're going to add once again a group item here. We're going to put this above our ground plane group that we just made. And then we're going to make the item the masking selector, and we're going to select that all fruits group that we just created. And then from inside of there, we're just going to once again add a shader here, and then this is just going to be visible to camera to turn that off. So let us open up a preview here and check out to see if we're getting the results we want. So we want that sort of seamless white background, and we want the shadows. So it's getting a little bit splotchy inside of here, and then we're also getting this sort of little bit of a cutout, and I think that is because what I realized after the fact is we have some displacement going on our fruits that's pushing it beyond the surface of our object. So if we take that lemon and that orange and we move them up ever so slightly, maybe 10 millimeters, we can open up that preview again. All right. Well, that gets rid of most of the hole. Now I think the next problem that we want to resolve is this splotchiness. Now, irradiance caching that Modo uses by default isn't a good solution when you have very tight spaces inside of here, very inaccessible areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the render, and I'm just going to disable altogether the irradiance caching, and that defaults back to Monte Carlo shading. So what we want to do is just up these rays here. We're going to go into the settings, and we're going to up the anti-aliasing to try and get that shadow as smooth as possible. And I think that is going to give us good enough results for what we want to do. It's definitely gotten rid of that splotching inside of there. So I'm going to go ahead and render out this shadow pass now. So we can close our preview. Render. I'm going to abort this really quick because I forgot one other thing. My apologies. But I don't want to have an alpha output on this. So I'm going to turn off the alpha. So I'm just going to get a solid output. So when I save this image, if I had the alpha, you'd only see the shadow. And I want to be able to control that myself. So I'm going to turn off that alpha. Now I'm going to hit the render again. And you don't want to have to sit through all of this. It's going to take a little bit of while to render out all of those rays. So I'm going to pause this, and then we'll be back in a second to finish off the composing of those elements. All right, so there's our rendered image there. That's not too bad at all for that. So let's save that image out. We're going to save that as the all fruit shadow there. Okay, so let's switch over to Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop with our images open, our shadow, rendered shadow, and our fruit cut out. So let me note, first thing in the fruit is we're going to open up here. So this isn't a Photoshop tutorial per se. You don't actually need to be using Photoshop for this. Any sort of image editor should do this. But if I just go in here to layer mask from transparency, if we just zoom in here to these fruits, to this edge, I just want to show you really quick what the unpre-multiply option in Modo is doing. So if I disable that by holding down Shift and clicking on that, you can see how it has spread out these pixels just a little bit there beyond that mask edge. So you can see how they kind of pop out. So that way these pixels out here, so that way you don't end up with any of that background inside of there. So you get a nice clean edge with the unpre-multiply. It's a great option for copying that over other layers. So what we want to do here is we're just going to select this layer here and click Control Copy. And then I'm just going to go in here, and then we're going to create a new layer and paste this in. I'm just going to adjust the levels on this real quick. Image, adjust, levels. We can clip out some of this extra noise we don't need in the white layer. All right, now let's invert that to create that selection. Drag that down to select. going to create a layer in the background by holding down Control, and then we're going to fill that with the foreground color. And that gives us our shadow now that we have for our object. So if we add in another layer here, so that is our final scene right there. So we have the shadow composed separately so that we can go in and control the opacity of that. And then we just have a black shadow for that object. And then we have our cutout fruit. So I'm going to delete this white layer. And then we're going to save this as a texture map here. So I'm going to say File, Save As. And we're going to save this into the textures here. And this is just going to be the all fruits, and I'm going to save that as a PNG. So all fruits PNG, and we're going to be using that later on once we model our package. So now that we've completed the fruits, we've done the cutout, the next stop we're going to do is we're going to take this package and we're going to be modeling this package in a realistic style.